Good morning, everyone. Lots going on as usual. Sorry, I was a little bit lengthy there on the intro. There was notifications popping up just as I went live, and I thought, oh my gosh, I have to deal with these, so I dealt with them. Anyway, SNAP payments in the United States, Donald Trump is trying to pay them because he realizes that not paying 40 million people their SNAP benefits is going to cause civil unrest, and he's trying to avoid that. And I think that the civil unrest is actually part and parcel of the Democrats' plan, and so it's an interesting chess game. I think this is one of those things that not necessarily caught Trump off guard, but they're even getting conflicting legal advice from different courts saying they can fund it, they have to fund it, they can't fund it at all, they're not allowed to fund it. And so it's a very interesting situation. I don't know what's going to happen. We'll see in the next couple of days, I guess. But the Trump administration is trying to fund these SNAP benefits. And I've said before, and I'll say again, it's not that I want to fund 45 million people's addiction to junk food or their sodas or all of the other stuff that they maybe buy in a way that is not in a way I would agree with. But there's a right way to turn it off and a wrong way to turn it off. And just turning it off like that without giving people a chance to adjust their behavior and adjust their funding and all the rest of it is a catastrophic way to do things. It's not the right way to do things at all. And so they're trying to not do that, but we'll see if they get forced to do that anyway. Very interesting times. Trade with China resumes in Canada. Just don't ask about specifics or canola or anything like that because, well, China, I think that we've been kind of hand in glove with China for a long, long time. And this is just optics and maybe coming out of whatever hidden kind of shroud that we were under when Trump and China were at odds. And now that Trump and China are close to a trade deal, Canada can say, oh yeah, we love those guys too. But really, I think China's really, really in charge of our policies in a lot of different areas, including fentanyl export and other drug, human trafficking, other things like that. And I think they really like Canada. I think they really, really like Canada. It's really easy to get away with a whole bunch of stuff. And if you're into child porn, you can do that too, right? Because the Supreme Court struck that down. We'll start there today. Remembrance Day parades are canceled in the United Kingdom. I'm surprised they're not officially canceled in Canada yet. Mandatory minimum struck down. We just talked about that. Google's suppressing wiretap media. It's very interesting. He's talking about lots and lots of different stories, and he's got a way bigger following than me, and he's being more suppressed than me, which is wild. And the Bible is hate speech, according to Mark Miller. So there's lots to get to. Let's get to it first. We are starting with the child porn thing. And so regular pornography was normalized, and I mean that's happened over the last 30 years, 35 years, right? In the 80s, it was something that was kind of looked down upon. Now I think it's a completely normal thing that people are almost open about, right? And I mean, like, you've got OnlyFans, you've got that whatever, is that the podcast, the whatever podcast, where OnlyFans girls come in and talk to straight edge guys and like people watch that and stuff. So like this is a normalized thing that we've adopted into society. Now we're ready for the next step, right? Which is obviously children doing that too. Wild. And Canada's leading the way. Oh gosh, that's not good, right? And so CTV. And again, I'll say socially, culturally, in the 1950s, what was happening in the 1980s would be like no way, right? And what's happening now would be not dismissed, but people would not be tolerant of it necessarily, right? And so we've been stepped a couple of degrees in order to accept what's going on right now without too much pushback. And that's all by design. It's very, very well thought out and executed plan. Here's CTV News. They're reporting mandatory minimum child pornography sentences unconstitutional, the Supreme Court rules. And I mean, I'd like to say I'm shocked, but I'm really not shocked. It's one of those things that's not been coming down the pipeline for a while. But I mean, people have been floating this minor attracted person as a rebranding of pedophilia, all sorts of crazy stuff. And so a legal opinion backing that, it's not coming out of left field for me. Danielle Smith is responding. She says, this decision is outrageous. The possession of child pornography is a heinous crime, and even a 1-year minimum sentence is already too lenient. We call on the federal government to immediately invoke the Constitution's notwithstanding clause to overturn this ruling and ensure the protection of our children. Read more. So where's Mark Carney? Oh, he's touring submarines somewhere. I don't know, something about South Korea. I don't know. Ben says, I'm going to keep tweeting about this because it's so enraging. The quotes below are graphic. here's what the hypothetical scenario was versus the actual facts of the case for the Supreme Court to come to the conclusion that they've come to. And again, take this with a grain of salt, but I believe this to be accurate. The hypothetical scenario that they used to overturn this was an 18-year-old gets a sext from a friend of the friend's 17-year-old girlfriend. Court finds that 1 year sentence is grossly disproportionate in this hypothetical case. Okay, I guess like you could make an argument there, I suppose. And like individually, I think cases like that could be argued individually, possibly, probably, right? The judge would have some discretion one way or the other, although I guess a mandatory minimum is not some discretion. But anyway, versus what actually happened. Louis Pierre Senville admitted having been in possession of 475 files, including 317 images of children constituting child pornography. Of these images, 90% were of young girls between the age of 3 and 6 years of age, some showing victims being subject to acts of penetration and sodomy committed by adults and minors. And that's crazy. Like bears no resemblance at all to kind of the muddy waters of involuntarily receiving images of somebody who is 17 years old versus adults abusing horrifically children. Like these are different things completely, right? Like I don't think you can't conflate the two things, I don't think even, right? Like if somebody voluntarily sends you a picture of their 17-year-old self, that person bears some responsibility for what they're doing. Meanwhile, a 3-year-old does not bear any responsibility for being abused at all, period, right? Like at all. So these two cases are not comparable, and yet our Supreme Court is using one to justify the other. Can you say straw man? Tamara Litch says, mischief nabs you 3.5 years of lawfare and 18 months of house arrest in Canada, though. So child grooming, pedophilia, images of horrific abuse of children, don't worry about it. No minimums, no mandatory minimums for you, buddy. But how dare you honk some horns in Ottawa and bother Zexi Lee? So Dr. Leslie Lewis is responding to this as well. She says, when a society stops protecting its children, it begins to lose its soul. The recent Supreme Court decision should force us to reflect the law must protect the most vulnerable, and we need a society that is willing to draw that line clearly, courageously, and without compromise. Protecting children isn't politics, it's humanity. Justice must be firm enough to deter and clear enough to show that harming a child will never be met with leniency. Didn't Canada just approve a gay throuple adopting a child? Didn't that just happen in Canada? Didn't we just see like 3 guys walking down the street holding hands with a kid or something like that? No? Am I misimagining that? We have to protect the children, she says, but also let's ignore certain things that are happening around the world or around our country. Doug Ford says, I can't believe it. The Supreme Court ruled against 1 year mandatory minimum sentences for possession and access to child pornography. These people are predators, disgusting scumbags who prey on children, belong behind bars for the rest of their miserable lives. The notwithstanding clause was designed to protect the will of the people. The federal government needs to use it to overturn this decision immediately. When justice abdicates its duty, when justice doesn't do its job, when it refuses to do its job, people will do the job for them. And so I think that they're maybe hoping that people will do the job for them, and then they can say, see, look, these right-wingers are really violent. It's like, we'll ignore all of the violence done on the left, right? Pierre Poilievre is responding to this as well. He says, child porn users must face mandatory prison time. The Supreme Court ruling today removing those penalties was dead wrong. Conservatives will use the notwithstanding clause to protect the rights of children by locking up child porn users with mandatory prison time. We must protect our children, okay? In certain situations. In other situations, we must groom them through education. But, Pierre Poilievre's, if you ask Billboard Chris about Pierre Poilievre's stance on anything with regards to children, I bet you'd get an earful, right? I think. Billboard Chris doesn't like me, but I don't think he should police his protesters' speech. So, oh well. PSAC, Table Salt is reporting on this. PSAC warns federal budget could lead to 70,000 job cuts in the public sector. Wowzers. I've got this somewhere else as well, but people are talking about the impact of this and why in the age of automation, in the age of AI, why we've had such an explosion of bureaucratic hiring and consultants in the last 10 years, right? Because hasn't the technology gotten better? But now we're cutting all of those jobs, right? Because we've got to send money to Ukraine. Right. Holy smokes, Carney to cut up to 70,000 government jobs. Good thing Ottawans voted for this. Congrats, you played yourselves. Right. Well, you can't double or almost triple the bureaucracy and then expect to just run that forever and have no consequences at all while you continue to poke Donald Trump in the eye with trade between the United States and Canada in jeopardy, right? Like, Gary is responding to Canada Spends. Canada Spends says $243 billion has been spent on Indigenous priorities since 2014. Annual federal spending rose from $10.3 billion to $69.9 billion. So $10 billion was in 2014, and now it's $69.9 billion in 2024. That's crazy. And Gary says, meanwhile, life on reserves for many Indigenous people is unchanged. Where in the heck is all this money gone? Besides the bureaucrats, the consultants, and the middlemen. Yeah, we spent $70 billion. And what do we have to show for it? I often try and give you tangible things that your average everyday Canadian can say, like, yeah, we got that. You know, like for trade with Mexico, we get fresh produce all year long and things like that, right? There's tangible things that, you know, may be worth it, probably could be worth it, right? But in a lot of the cases, I don't know what we get. I don't know what we get out of trade or out of sending money with no expectation of any payback to Ukraine. I don't know what we get. I don't know what we get for sending money to unendingly to Gaza. Good feelings, I guess, maybe. But at the same time, I question, are we funding terrorism because we're not checking any of this? I fear that we are, right? And so one of those things, what do we get out of funding Israel, right? And people say, oh, there's a long list of things we get. And then you read the list and I think to myself, I don't know, man. I don't know. It's, I don't think that these items, I think a lot of these items could be done here. I think that if we invested in ourselves, we could sell our own products to other countries that might be interested in having technology that Canadians made, right? Like, why outsource that, right? Anyway, Victoria says, moving on, let's talk about trade and how much time do we have? 12 minutes. Oh, we're good. Victoria says, best meme of the week. And it's Mark Carney. And he's the worst temporary foreign worker ever, right? He reminds me a lot of Ignatieff. Remember when Ignatieff was the next liberal rock star and he's, you know, an American dude who was Canadian mostly. And he went down to America to sow his wild oats or something like that. And now he's back and he's ready to run Canada. And everybody was like, you're an American. Like, can you kindly F off? He was a Harvard professor or some professor somewhere. And he lived in the United States for a long, long time. Carney, how long has it been since Carney's lived in Canada, right? Like it's a wild, wild thing to have a European banker come in and parachute into the prime minister's office. So I don't know. Here is Donald Trump, and he says, on trade, yeah, Carney apologized, but we're not restarting trade negotiations with Canada. Screw those guys. Here we go.
What did you talk about with Prime Minister Carney? Are you, like Canada, going to resume negotiations?
No, but I have a very good relationship. I like him a lot. But you know what they did was wrong. He was very nice. He apologized for what they did with the commercial.
He was very nice about apologizing, but yeah, we're not going to restart trade negotiations. Yikes. Right? That's not so good. Kirk says Mark Carney apologized to Donald Trump for Ontario's Ronald Reagan ad, but Trump has no intention to resume negotiations with Canada. Are you going to resume negotiations? No. And we just heard him say it. Here is CA Bird, and it's the same thing. Financial Post is reporting on that little exchange saying Trump and Carney are not going to restart negotiations. Gov.exe is highlighting this Carney bit, and he says, after sabotaging trade negotiations with the United States, Mark Carney heads to China and is now excited to build a more sustainable and inclusive relationship with them. The Liberals would rather do business with communist China than with our southern neighbor. This is just a show and tell. This is coming out from behind the curtain of where we were hiding before Trump would tolerate Canada being real close with China, right? And so now Trump's got a trade deal with China, so Canada can have a trade deal with China. Yay! And this is, you can see video of Mark Carney kowtowing deeply to Xi. Here we go.
Thank you, Mr. President. It is a pleasure to meet you again and to meet you for the first time in my capacity as Prime Minister. I had the great pleasure of attending, amongst other meetings in China, the G20, over which you presided, at a time of great hope for the international system and great progress under the banner of the G20. I look forward to further progress with your presidency of APEC next year. As you mentioned, our countries have a long history of cooperation, engagement, and trade. 55 years of diplomatic relations marked the anniversary 2 weeks ago. In recent years, we have not been as engaged In fact, as you know, this is the first formal meeting between the Canadian Prime Minister and the President of the People's Republic of China for 8 years. I also welcome the invitation to come to China to further the dialogue, and I very much look forward to doing so, because it's through this constructive and pragmatic dialogue that we will address a path for current issues, that we will establish a road to seize the many great opportunities between our countries, and also to have the platform that's needed for the dialogue to help build a more sustainable, inclusive international system.
Yeah, China's real worried about a sustainable, inclusive international system. They really like inclusive systems, right? What about those Uyghurs? Here's Mark Nixon, and he says, 4,300 liters of fentanyl chemicals from China were caught at Vancouver's port. Carney says Canada must be respected globally. Respected? The CCP is shipping death through our ports. He didn't say a single word about it. Yeah, I missed. Did you also miss the part where he said, stop shipping fentanyl to through our ports, please? Thank you very much. Right? Like I must have missed that between the kissing up and the brown nosing. So pretty crazy stuff, but we are allowing all of this to continue. Mark Carney says, President Xi and I met today at the APEC summit, marking a turning point in the bilateral relationship between Canada and China. Yes, it's now public. What was once private and only for our politicians is now for everybody to know. Yay, China's in charge. We are committed to renewing the relationship in a pragmatic and constructive way. Have there been resolutions on anything like the canola, the EV stuff? Like the two Michaels are not an issue right now, but don't we have outstanding diplomatic issues that need to be solved with China? Like the Wuhan flu, the people, the Chinese people who were working in the Winnipeg lab and then they disappeared, and then like all that COVID stuff that happened as well. Like, isn't there something outstanding that we need to deal with here? Super weird. How about all of our elections being rigged by China and the money and the students being bussed around? Isn't there something outstanding that we need to talk about here? No? Oh man, shucks. I guess that's just me. We each, back to this, we're committed to reviewing the relationship in a pragmatic and constructive way. We each directed our officials to move quickly to resolve outstanding trade issues and irritants, and we look forward to making progress on these issues as we strengthen ties between our two countries. Strengthen ties between China. So everybody in Canada is going to get a Chinese language website so we can start selling to China now. Yay, that's totally good. That's a good idea. This is a terrible idea. Here's Wab Canoe talking about how Doug Ford was right to use Ronald Reagan's own words. They almost sound intoxicated by their own take on things, just like when Justin Trudeau was talking about the vax and how, there's something special about this, and oh man, you feel so good when after you've been vaccinated and all this stuff. It feels similar to that. There's some kind of zealotry here. There's some kind of, I feel really good participating in this lie with everybody because everybody agrees with the lie I'm repeating here. And it just sounds silly. Reagan used tariffs. He didn't like tariffs that caused the Great Depression, but he used tariffs to protect the United States national interests, which is similar to what Donald Trump is doing, and they're misrepresenting all of that. Here's Wab Canoe.
The ads that we saw from Ontario using the voice of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan is the guy who invented the phrase, "Make America Great Again," right? He used that in his ads in the 80s, and now we're using his tariff opposition to effect. So we're feeling the impacts in Canada of the tariffs on our investment, on our economy. In the States, though, we kind of faded from the radar. This ad, it put us back in the national conversation, and the ads that we saw.
It means nothing. It doesn't put you in the conversation with people who matter to the President of the United States of America. And when you poke that guy in the eye, he is going to punch you back hard. And we keep getting punched. And we keep attempting to poke him in the eye after we get hammered into the ground. It's unbelievable. We've got to do this story before I say goodbye to the stream. Mark Miller thinks that he alone, or Canada alone, can understand and interpret the word of God. And of course, God is hateful. The Christian God is hateful, according to Mark Miller. Never mind the Islamic God or anything like that. Never mind Muslims. Never mind hateful, like never mind the hateful rhetoric in other religious texts, and they are well documented, right? Mark Miller goes after Christianity and the Christian God. Isn't that weird? Isn't that super weird? So Canada Proud says every single Christian in Canada needs to hear about this. Spread it far and wide. I've got other supplemental things that are not where they should be, so I'm going to have to look for them in just a minute. But here we go.
Just use the chair's prerogative for 2 seconds to ask a follow-up question to Mr. Ross. And as despicable and as unlawful, I believe the statements made by Mr. Sharkawi were and would be if they were stated again. We don't know why the prosecution chose not to continue with the charges. And perhaps it is to Mr. Fortin's point. I just want to dig in a bit about the concept of good faith, Mr. Ross. In Leviticus, Deuteronomy, Romans, there's other passages, there is clear hatred towards, for example, homosexuals. I don't understand how the concept of good faith could be invoked if someone were literally invoking a passage from, in this case, the Bible, but there are other religious texts that say the same thing, and somehow say that this is good faith. I mean, clearly there are situations in these texts where these statements are hateful. They should not be used to invoke or be a defense, and there should perhaps be discretion for prosecutors to press charges. I just want to understand what your notion of good faith is in this context, where there are clearly passages in religious texts that are clearly hateful. Just use
right, and he uses the Bible to illustrate these facts. Very interesting choice. Very interesting choice. People are not happy about all of this. Here's Vesper, and he says, for any Christian who wants more context on this clip posted by Canada Proud, it would be in your best interest to hear what was said before that led to this absurd conflation and disingenuous leap of logic from talking about Islamic jihadists asking for the extermination of Jews to the Christian Bible as being equivalently hateful from MP Mark Miller. The witness, a Christian lawyer, Derek Ross, responded to him perfectly by stating, I don't agree, Mr. Chair. If members of Parliament are of the view that passages in the Bible are hateful, I think that's something Canadians should be made aware of. The court, for example, can't decide, for example, if Jesus Christ objectively is the Son of God. Amen and amen. God bless Mr. Ross. I'm placing the link and Derek's X account in the comments if you want to follow him and send him words of thanks. So this, in response, it's 5 minutes. So just for broader context in what's going on here. Again, I had another person, and maybe it was deleted, but because sometimes this happens, but it was, I can't remember his name. It's 2 S's, and I can't remember his name, but he's a well-known protester. And he said, listen, I studied the Quran. I live in Ontario. I came here to escape Islam from my home country, blah, 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 blah. And what this imam is saying is extremely hateful, like extreme. And he's quoting from the Quran here. And so the comparison is interesting when trying to talk about the invasion of Canada and the cultural destruction that we're undergoing. Mark Miller is pivoting back to, oh yeah, but what about the hate of the Christian God? And it's weird. It's a weird thing to notice, right? So we've got to move on. So thanks everybody who is watching on the stream. If you want the whole show, head over to CanadaPoly.com. If not, that's okay. We will catch you tomorrow. We've got lots more show. I've got the grab bag of governance coming up. We've got to talk about the United States, net zero, UK. There's some invasion stuff. There's a good meaty story in here that I can't remember, and more free speech stuff as well. So anyway, if you want that, head over to Canada.